Good morning, everyone. I call this hearing to order, and without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. I'm going to begin in noting some important requirements. Let me first say that standing House and committee rules and practice continue to apply during hybrid proceedings. All members are reminded that they are expected to adhere to standing rules, including the rules of decorum. House regulations require members to be visible through a video connection throughout the proceeding, so keep your cameras on. Also, please remember to remain muted until you're recognized in order to minimize background noise. And if you have to participate in another proceeding, exit this one and log back in later. In the event a member encounters technical issues that prevent them from being recognized for their questioning, I will move to the next available member of the same party, and I'll recognize that member at the next appropriate time slot, provided they've returned to the proceeding. For members and staff physically present in the committee room today, in accordance with the attending physician's most recent guidance, members and staff who attend this hybrid hearing in person will be required to wear masks in the hearing room. Furthermore, all members and staff who have not been fully vaccinated must maintain 6-foot social distancing. With that said, members will be allowed to briefly remove their masks if they have been recognized to speak. That includes those who are here with us testifying today as well, Mr. Dane. I'll now do a quick, brief opening statement. Kind of brief. We'll see. In the state of Maine, we are home to a strong logging and forest products industry, and it's been that way throughout our history. Thousands of Mainers make their living in the woods or in mills, making things out of wood fiber. The industry has faced tough times in recent decades for a variety of reasons, from trade policies, outsourcing of jobs, demand slumps, and more. But loggers and other forest products workers, many of them small businesses, love what they do, and they've kept at it as a way of making a good living and as a way of life. That's important because small businesses in the forest products industry and the sustainable forestry they practice in Maine are primed to play an important role in the growth of renewable energy and combating climate change in the years to come. It's a great opportunity for small businesses in rural, heavily forested states like Maine and for the communities that they call home. America's forests and woodlands are vast. These natural resources cover about a third of the country and nearly 90% of my state. These forests house diverse wildlife, improve air and water quality, sequester carbon dioxide, and provide critical resources for the U.S. and countries worldwide. Sustainable forestry seeks to manage forests to support the natural forest resources and ecosystem services we need now and in the future. These practices include protecting forests from wildfire, pests, and diseases, and preserving forests. I'm proud to say my home state of Maine has many landowners and businesses that use these practices. We have a healthy forest as a result. Sustainable forestry can also help combat the impact of climate change, which has already begun to hurt forest health across the country. Unpredictable temperature changes, drought, fire, and invasive pests pose a fundamental threat to our beloved woodlands. Fortunately, sustainable forestry can maintain and restore carbon sequestration in forests, helping to fight climate change and keep our forests intact. The people doing this sustainable forestry are often small businesses, as I've said. They're logging operators, forest products companies, biomass facilities, and many more. These are folks who create jobs and keep their local economies moving while keeping our forests healthy and contributing to efforts to mitigate climate change. And as we're seeing, the market for the products that sustainable forestry produces is full of potential. Woody biomass, such as waste from logging and milling, can be used in industrial applications to produce steam and electricity, reducing the use of fossil fuels. Cross-laminated timber is being used in buildings in the U.S. and across the world, and innovative new forest products hit the market every year. Keeping our forests healthy helps to promote sustainability, address climate change, and ensure that small businesses and workers in rural areas share in the economic benefits. As Congress looks to address and mitigate the negative sides of climate change and bolster American small businesses with the bipartisan infrastructure bill and other legislation, we should support industries that help on both fronts. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about how policies can be put together here in Congress that will help them be successful businesses as business owners, that will help them to continue to make a living the way that they choose and enjoy, while also taking part in good sustainable forestry that makes for a healthy forest. I'd now like to yield to Mr. Stauber, I'm sorry, I'm not yielding to Mr. Stauber for opening statements, rather recognizing Ranking Member Hagedorn for his opening statement. And it's a real pleasure to be here with you today. Thanks for joining us, and I was very glad to find out you'd be attending this morning.
Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate you holding this hearing, and I look forward to the witnesses' accounts. You could have yielded to Mr. Stauber. He's quite an expert on these issues, and I look forward to hearing some of his comments in just a little bit. Minnesota, like many places around the country, home to some beautiful forests and provide us incredible scenery, but also some awesome products that we use every day and we rely on every day. And this hearing's a lot about how we can help small businesses to continue to provide those types of products to the American people. And let's face it, there are distinct similarities in the economic challenges facing small businesses in any rural economy, whether it be agriculture, forestry, mining, or whatever sector. All rural economies are vital and important to the health of our country, and forest product sector is no different. Forest products make up about 1.5% of the total U.S. economy and contribute about 5% of America's total manufacturing output. That's quite large when you think about it. And for many rural states, timber is the economic cornerstone, contributing a substantial amount of employment income. Timber provides higher than average wages, a variety of opportunities for employment, manufacturing, sales, and a host of other economic opportunities, all contributing to a robust and dynamic rural forest economy. Rural forest economies depend on the tireless efforts of small businesses executing forest management practices day in and day out. Historically, the timber industry has primarily consists of small, multi-generational family-owned businesses with less than 20 employees. People would think they're actually probably big companies. Not so. The margins generated by these businesses are slim, just 1% to 3% on average, and they assume millions of dollars in bank loans for expensive logging equipment on top of daily operating needs. So, you know, there's a lot at risk, a lot at play. Our small businesses are on the hook, and still those margins are very small. We have to do what we can to help. This places significant financial pressure on the small businesses to harvest timber year-round. Unfortunately, current events have exacerbated the economic challenges these small businesses are already facing in this industry. The COVID-19 pandemic shuttered schools, offices, and other industries reliant on paper. Pandemic-related closures of essential links in forestry supply chain, such as mills and other wood consumers, have placed timber harvesters and haulers in a vice, threatening their incomes. Compounding the problem are recent increases in operational expenses due to skyrocketing inflation, such as the rising cost of fuel, which has culminated in a 10 to 40% loss in revenue for many small businesses compared to the same time frame in 2019. Small businesses in the timber industry are also grappling with significant longer-term economic consequences stemming from the recent heavy wildfire activity. Small businesses lost valuable logging equipment, suffered from idle operations, and saw their incomes go up literally in smoke as millions of acres of revenue-generating timber were badly burned or damaged. These losses will be felt for generations, as it takes decades for lands to be rehabilitated and new growth to mature for harvest. Congress must work in bipartisan fashion to help better serve the forestry industry. One bill out there, H.R. 2612, the Restore Act, introduced by my friend Congressman Doug LaMaffa of California, would allow for landscape-scale management projects to give foresters a more reliable access to federal timber, which often gets tied up with unnecessary litigation. This is especially important to the countless number of foresters who depend on a reliable source of federal timber and serve as partners in the Forest Service efforts to properly manage our forest lands to prevent fires. Congressman LaMaffa offered the Restore Act as an amendment to the agriculture bill. I was there and voted for it, but unfortunately, it was blocked by the majority. To close, I'd like to highlight just one more challenge facing small businesses in the American forestry industry, namely its aging and declining workforce. The Bureau of Labor Statistics projects that over 7,000 openings for logging workers on average for each year over the next decade. So 7,000 jobs open each year for during this next decade. This logging has been characterized as difficult, dirty, dangerous, and even declining. However, the adoption of modern technology is attempting to disrupt this perception, creating a more high-tech working environment from qualified and skilled tradesmen to mechanical engineers. I hope from the testimony of our esteemed panel, we will learn more about how we can reignite interest in this noble profession, grasp a better understanding of the economic realities, and try to have some good government policies in order to further their businesses. With that, I yield back.
Thank you very, excuse me. Thank you. I'd like to take a moment to explain how the hearing will now proceed. Each witness has 5 minutes to provide a statement, and each committee member will have 5 minutes for questions. Please ensure that your microphone is on when you begin speaking and that you return to mute when finished. We'll now quickly introduce our witnesses. Our first witness is Mr. Duran, Executive Director of the Professional Logging Contractors of Maine. Prior to representing Maine's independent logging contractors, he served with both public and private organizations, including the U.S. Department of Labor, the Maine Department of Labor, Central Maine Power Company, and Kennebec Valley Community College. Thank you for joining us today, Dana. Our second witness is Dr. Adam Daigneault. You'll have to forgive me if I mispronounce this, sir. Associate Professor of Forest Policy and Economics at the University of Maine. He is the head of the UMaine Forest Policy and Economics Lab. His research focuses on a wide range of issues, including freshwater management, climate change mitigation and adaptation, and assessing the socioeconomic impacts of environmental policy on the natural resource sectors. Thank you for joining us today, and I can tell you they do amazing work at the University of Maine, and they're great partners with folks like the logging contractors and the forest products industry in the state. Our third witness is Mr. Mark Thibodeau, Regional Manager for Re-Energy Biomass Operations in Maine. Re-Energy's bioenergy facilities transform sustainably sourced woody biomass, other wood waste, and other organic residues into renewable clean energy that provides power to thousands of homes and businesses in Maine. Mr. Thibodeau is a lifelong Mainer and a graduate of the Maine Maritime Academy. Thanks for joining us today. And Mr. Stauber will now introduce the minority witness.
Well, thank you, Chairman Golden and Ranking Member Hagedorn, for your leadership on this committee. It's been wonderful to work with you. You know, northern Minnesota is blessed to have a rich forest landscape and a robust logging and milling industry acting as a keystone of our state's economic engine. Therefore, I look forward to the discussion ahead of us today on the role of small business in forest management and carbon sequestration. First of all, forest management, and especially logging, means solutions. Forest management is a solution to preventing and mitigating wildfires. Forest management is a solution to ensuring sustainable public lands. Forest management is a solution in facilitating recreation. Forest management is a solution for economic development and job creation. And forest management is a solution to sequestration of carbon. And all of these solutions through forest management is driven by the small business community. In my district and nationwide, tens of thousands of loggers work in private, county, state, and federally owned forests, creating jobs and finding solutions. So let's be clear. So-called climate solutions are impossible without logging and forest management. For example, in Minnesota and throughout the nation, our loggers plant 3 trees for every one harvested. As we all know, these living trees sequester carbon and, towards the end of their life cycle, create more jobs. On the other hand, a dead tree that falls into the woods isn't just a proverb. It emits carbon into the atmosphere and provides fuel for wildfires, multiplying its carbon intensity. Our forests sequester 15% of Americans' carbon each year. But this is impossible without the proactive management and reforestation efforts of small logging companies throughout our nation. However, our logging businesses are discouraged due to this administration's mounting crisis and poor policy making. And here are several examples. Transportation fuel costs are up exponentially. Why? This administration opted to ban domestic oil and gas development and instead rely on OPEC to provide the fuels our small business truckers need to move the product to market. Skyrocketing energy prices and economic shutdowns endanger mills, meaning fewer markets for logs and timber products. Passage of big land bills and amendments that take federal lands completely offline mean our loggers can't proactively manage our forests, they can't clear dead trees, and they can't help to prevent wildfires. Furthermore, older loggers are aging out of this profession. And because there's more land offline and fewer markets than ever before, the younger generation doesn't see the promise of those future logging jobs. Burdensome regulation for public land management coupled with lawsuit after lawsuit from activist groups complicate project permitting and tie up projects in legal costs. Moreover, this administration's nominee to lead the Bureau of Land Management endangered the lives of loggers in Idaho with tree spiking, a form of eco-terrorism, illustrating further hostility to these small business loggers. I don't know of a way to discourage logging more than to nominate someone who willfully put lives of loggers at stake as a leader of one of our largest land management agencies. So in order for responsible forest management to continue, we need to support policies that encourage instead of discourage logging. We need cheap, reliable energy for transportation and the powering of our mills. We need to expedite the process for compliance. We need to reform our broken NEPA process and keep loggers in the woods, not in the courtroom. We need to pass my own bill, the Healthy Forests for Hunters Act, which streamlines environmental reviews for timber projects on federal land that benefit wildlife habitat, simultaneously supporting forest management and boosting hunting opportunities nationwide. And we need to vote against land packages and amendments that halt responsible management. We need to encourage loggers to grow into the profession with robust workforce, pipelines, and administrators of land management agencies that aren't a threat to our small business and our logging community. If we do these things, we will empower our small business loggers and truckers to do what they do best, which is manage our forests, find solutions, including climate solutions. With all that said, I am pleased to introduce a constituent of mine as the Republican witness today. Scott Dane currently serves as the Executive Director of the American Loggers Council, which represents nearly 10,000 small businesses and 50,000 employees and spans 30 states. Prior to this role, Scott served as Executive Director of the Minnesota Associated Contract Loggers and Truckers, our state's association representing the small businesses that play a key role in northern Minnesota's economy. There are few who can speak with more authority than Scott on timber and transportation. As he tells us in his opening remark, our loggers are key to forest health and a thriving economy. As a once-in-a-half-a-century wildfire raged across northern Minnesota, the loggers Scott represents played a key role in creating fire breaks and working to mitigate the damage. Scott, thank you for your advocacy, and thank you to the loggers for their hard work and their families. I look forward to your testimony. Mr. Chair, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. We're now going to go to our witness testimony, and we'll begin with Mr. Duran, who is recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Golden, Ranking Member Hagedorn, and members of the Committee on Small Business, Subcommittee on Underserved Agriculture and Rural Development. My name is Dane Duran, and I'm Executive Director of the Professional Logging Contractors of Maine. The PLC of Maine is the voice of independent logging and associated trucking contractors throughout the state of Maine. Our organization was formed in 1995 to provide contractors with a voice in a rapidly changing forest industry. Appreciate the opportunity to speak before you today. So logging in Maine, as of 2017, logging and trucking contractors in Maine employed over 3,900 people directly and were indirectly responsible for the creation of an additional 5,400 jobs. This employment and the investments that contractors make contribute more than $620 million to our state's economy each year. Our membership, which includes about 210 contractor members, employs over 2,500 people, and is representative of 80% of Maine's annual timber harvest. Thank you very much again for providing me the opportunity to testify on behalf of our membership in the state regarding sustainable forestry's role in climate solutions. Thanks as well for recognizing the work of our national partner with the American Loggers Council and having Mr. Dane before you today. Whether it's here in Maine or across the United States, the timber harvesting community is a vital part of the responsible management of our nation's forests, as well as a vital partner in creating solutions for preservation of our climate. Many on this committee might find it odd for a trade association that represents loggers and truckers in the state, typically a conservative group, to stand before you today to discuss how timber harvesting can be part of the solution and not part of the problem. With that in mind, I can say with great honesty that this perception is not reality when it comes to Maine's logging and trucking community. Over the last 20 years, we have learned to recognize and prepare for our role in climate mitigation through our work on the ground. We've been accustomed to wildly changing weather patterns, mud seasons that extend not just weeks, but months, and the influence of invasive species and pests in the forest. As a result, we've been required to adapt quickly. 2 decades ago, our members could work between 46 and 52 weeks a year. Mud season was restricted to the months of April and May, but now it's limited to between 38 and 44 weeks per year. It is clear to Maine's legacy industry that climate and weather patterns have indeed changed, and this change is adding cost and lowering profitability. During the same time, there's been an ad hoc approach to both technology and public policy. While intended public policy changes with respect to mandates have brought about positive change on one side, I can tell you that they've had a negative impact upon our industry. One primary example of this is the use of Tier 4 engines, which has been mandated by both Congress and the federal government. While the technology has been positive in terms of curbing emissions, and we have fully adopted it, it has also added cost in terms of 25 to 50% to every piece of equipment used in this industry over the last 10 years. Loggers and truckers are price takers and have no ability to charge more for the work that they do. And so it's our opinion that changes like this can have a positive impact, but you've got to take into consideration the negative impacts at the same time. Loggers and truckers were never included in the discussions, and therefore we just ask that going forward, we are for any future changes that take place. From a state perspective, I'd like to touch upon what Maine has done in terms of a leadership role. Our current governor, Governor Janet Mills, has created a climate council as well as a forest carbon task force. I have been a member of both the Climate Council as well as the Forest Carbon Task Force over the last 2 years. In terms of the Mills administration Climate Action Plan, it has been very obvious that forests are part of a carbon storage and climate mitigation strategy, and especially timber harvesting contractors. But we have to have incentives to promote high quality on the ground performance by loggers and investment in low impact harvesting equipment. To achieve both goals, contractors must work to reduce emissions and minimize impacts. Therefore, they're going to require financial incentives to do this work. Here in Maine, we have something called the Direct Link Loan Program, which has been funded by US EPA water quality funding. It has been a help to lower the cost of harvesting equipment, but at the same time, we don't have enough funding. And I would ask this committee to consider including more funding for that program and making it a nationwide program. Lastly, our Master Logger Program, which we created here in the state of Maine back in the year 2000, which is the world's only third-party certification program for logging contractors, has now been adopted in 19 other states and is now potentially, or has been adopted in 3 other foreign countries and is on target to expand to 3 other foreign countries. It is similar to the Forest Stewardship Council, as well as in addition to the Sustainable Forestry Initiative. And I would ask that Congress take a hard, fast look at this and try to adopt it for federal agencies, federal forests. The American Loggers Council is our partner in this. And we'd like to see the federal government actually adopt not just forest management standards with SFI and FSC, but also look at third-party certification for timber harvesting contractors at the same time. In my written testimony today, you'll see the benefits of the Master Logger Program, where it has been adopted, why it is so important, and why third-party certification of logging companies and not just training for loggers is more important in the long run. So with that, I think I've come to the end of my testimony. I'm happy to answer any questions at the end of the hearing by any members. And again, I'd like to thank Congressman Golden and Ranking Member Hagedorn for inviting me today and participating before the committee. Thanks very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Dana, you got to see if you can screen share some photos of me and some of the equipment up there for the members down here, driving around, learning a thing or two. But it's a great program. He was talking about. We'll have more time to talk about it later. Next up, I'm not going to do you the disservice of butchering your last name. Adam, you're up, and you can call me Jared anytime. You're still on mute.
My apologies. All right, thank you, Chairman Jared Golden, Ranking Member Hagedorn, and members of this subcommittee for holding this hearing today and the opportunity to testify on this important topic. My name is Dr. Adam Daigneault, or Daigneault, as our namesake comes from your hometown of Lewiston, Jared. And I'm an associate professor of forest policy and economics here at University of Maine. I've been working on issues related to forest management, economics, and policy for nearly 2 decades. Forests across the globe are highly valued for their diverse ecosystem services, including timber, fiber, and fuel resources, carbon sequestration, freshwater, habitat, recreation, and cultural values. As noted by Member Hagedorn's opening remarks, across the U.S., forest-related businesses support at least 3 million jobs and generate around 5% of total manufacturing GDP. However, forest resources across the country face increasing pressures from shifting markets, land use change, policy, and climate change. U.S. forest systems, ecosystems, and the wood they produce are a large carbon sink. Our forest sector removes more than 12% of annual greenhouse gas emissions. And while forest carbon stocks are increasing in this country, it's uncertain if this trend will persist with changing socioeconomic and climatic conditions. Thus, forests have an immense potential to help mitigate climate change if landowners are provided adequate incentives and technical assistance. Forest carbon is a low-cost climate solution, and nationwide sequestration rates could double with the proper incentives. For example, Maine's forest and wood products already remove about 70% of the state's annual greenhouse gas emissions and are expected to be a huge contributor to achieving their net zero emissions target by 2045. Sustainable forest management and harvest are key to enhancing forest carbon sinks. Without this, forests grow slower, are less resilient to climate change, and sequester carbon at lower rates. And a wide range of sustainable forest management practices should be used to promote climate solutions while maintaining timber supply. These include quickly regenerating sites with climate change resistant species, reducing the risk of loss to natural disturbance, conducting treatments to increase growth, and using efficient climate-friendly harvesting practices. Markets are really key to maintaining the health and sustainability of our forests, finding new uses for wood and supporting rural communities to ensure a vibrant workforce can improve forest health. Robust and stable timber markets enable the carefully planned harvest of trees that allow forests to have appropriate stocking levels, balanced age classes, and species diversity. Continued research and development into new and more efficient uses of wood are critical to supporting our rural economies. These include wood bioenergy, biofuels, mass timber, nanocellulose-based products, and bioplastics. The University of Maine is researching many of these innovations thanks to grants from the USDA, DOE, NSF, and more. As noted, markets play a key role also in keeping forests as forests. Land is a commodity, and low-value land risks being converted to alternative uses. We need to promote markets for all grades of wood and forest uses that will help maintain or increase its value, incentivize management, and reduce deforestation. Timber harvesting is necessary to meet both societal needs and mitigate climate change. Nearly 20% of our forest carbon is in harvested wood products, which can be substituted for emissions-intensive materials like steel and concrete. Incentivizing practices that maintain or increase harvest and carbon will be a win-win for society and the climate. Wood-based bioenergy is part of the climate solution. Bioenergy markets increase forest value and incentivize removal of wood that otherwise dies and releases carbon. Putting this to use can reduce fossil fuel emissions. A federal renewable energy standard for sustainably harvested biomass would improve low-grade wood markets. Several federal programs could be utilized to incentivize forest management and enhance carbon sinks. These include the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service programs like EQIP and CSP, and the U.S. Forest Service's Forest Stewardship forest legacy, and forest inventory analysis programs, to name a few. Enhancing these programs can improve forest conditions and wood utilization, thereby increasing both carbon stocks and the flow of timber products. Additional funding must be devoted to reducing the risk of wildfire and other natural disturbances. Maintaining or increasing federal tax incentives like the management and reforestation deductions will incentivize landowners to actively manage their land for timber, carbon, and other co-benefits. We must continue to support research and economic development in the forest products and land management sectors through federal grants from the USDA, DOE, NSF, EDA, and others. The opportunities and challenges for sustainably managing our forests for timber, carbon, and other ecosystem services are notably complex. Given the recent changes to our forest ecosystems in the wood product sector, there's more need than ever to employ the very best science to inform decision-making. We must continue to research and promote opportunities that simultaneously improve the resilience of our forests and the rural economies and people who depend on this key natural resource. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak on this topic. I invite you all to visit Maine and see all the great things that are going on at our universities and working for us to implement sustainable forest management and grow our forest economy. And Representative Golden, I look forward to seeing you again in December at the Millinocket Marathon. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Daigneault. I get that one right better? Getting closer? So growing up, I always wondered why my great-grandmother called me Gerard. And they came down out of like Chicoutimi to the Lewiston area. But the French-speaking tradition stopped with my mother's generation, at least with me. But it's a certainly familiar Lewiston name.
Yeah, it's the same for me as well. But
absolutely. By the way, I'm not sure that I have a half marathon in me. That was a brutal race. That was a cold day, and I had a good time, and it's for a great cause. And you want to talk about an old mill town? Very much related to the
and it's
subject
an excellent
today.
way to innovative ways that people are trying to prop up rural communities. So.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. Thanks, Professor. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Thibodeau.
All right, good morning, Chairman Jared Golden, Ranking Member Jim Hagedorn, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you to discuss sustainable forestry's role as a climate solution. I'll be speaking specifically to wood energy as a climate solution this morning. My name is Mark Thibodeau. I'm a lifelong Mainer, and I'm a graduate of Maine Maritime Academy with a degree in Marine Systems Engineering. I live in Maine's 2nd Congressional District, and I serve as Regional Manager for Energy Biomass Operations. I've managed five biomass power plants in Maine in the course of my career, as well as 5 in California. In Maine, ReEnergy operates 2 biomass power facilities, both in the 2nd Congressional District. We operate a 39 megawatt facility in Livermore Falls and a 48 megawatt facility in Stratton. We use sustainably harvested forest and mill residue as fuel to generate base loaded renewable electricity. I'd like to stress there the base loaded portion of that. The Stratton facility also supplies and provides electricity directly to an adjacent lumber mill. Our wood ash from the Stratton facility is also used by more than 100 Maine farms as a soil amendment for balancing soil pH, enhancing nutrient levels, and has also been approved as an organic fertilizer. ReEnergy also operates a 60 megawatt biomass power facility in New York, the ReEnergy Black River facility, which is located inside the fence at the U.S. Army installation of Fort Drum. That plant provides all of the post electricity from behind the meter, creating energy security and resiliency. And then lastly, we operate a 50 megawatt Albany Green Energy facility. There's a 50 megawatt biomass heat power facility located in Albany, Georgia. This facility supplies electricity to Georgia Power and steam to Procter & Gamble and a nearby Marine Corps logistics base. I'd like to discuss how biomass energy supports sustainable forestry. Sustainable forestry is an important contributor to mitigating climate change and reducing the risk of wildfire. When forested lands are maintained and harvested in a sustainable way, the forest continues to grow and consume atmospheric carbon. Wood markets and wood utilization are essential to forest maintenance. Without an outlet for owners to sell their harvested wood, the owners are more likely to sell the land for other uses. Biomass power is an important component of the larger wood market. After the higher value fibers sold to make lumber, furniture, or paper, the landowner is left with lower value fiber like tops, the limbs, and thinnings that cannot easily be made into other wood products. When these leftovers or residues are sold to a biomass power facility, the landowner is able to further capitalize on their harvest, and the unusable fibers go toward generating base-loaded renewable energy. So biomass power facilities are located primarily in rural areas with active forests and/or agricultural economies. In some areas, biomass power facilities are actively involved in the reduction of catastrophic wildfires by repurposing forest debris that is very hazardous during wildfire season. Our fuel suppliers follow best management practices that ensure sustainable forest management. In all of our communities, forest growth greatly exceeds removals. What are some of the carbon benefits of biomass? Energy generated from biomass is recognized as having carbon benefits by most scientists, as well as many environmental organizations and regulators. This is because the carbon released by biomass power generation is already part of the carbon cycle, circulating between the atmosphere and the biosphere. Thus, like other types of renewable energy, including wind, solar, geothermal, and hydro, biomass energy production displaces greenhouse gas emissions that would have been produced had that energy been generated from fossil fuels. Even though the combustion of biomass generates biogenic emissions of CO2 on a gross basis, when the life cycle benefits of biomass are calculated, the net emissions from biomass are considered neutral or negligible, depending on the type of biomass. My written testimony provides much more information on the carbon benefits of biomass. With respect to federal policy issues, we are active members of the Biomass Power Association. And it often seems to us that biomass power is the least understood renewable energy resource. We have been working for years to urge the Environmental Protection Agency to implement the electricity portion of the renewable fuel standard and activate its biomass pathways, for an example, and to address definitional interpretations of the term biomass in the renewable fuel standard. Without equitable policy support, it can become difficult for biomass to serve as a robust part of the country's renewable energy portfolio. We've been trying to address tax inequities that prioritize the growth of other renewable technologies at the expense of biomass and other base loads. Regarding the role of biomass in underserved communities, there are many underserved communities across the country that rely on forestry for income, with biomass being part of their revenue stream. For example, Native Americans are the largest owners of commercial forestry resources in the United States, controlling 16 million acres of forest land. Some of our fuel at our facilities here in Maine comes from tribal land managed by the Penobscot Nations. My written testimony provides additional examples of underserved communities involved in the forestry sector. So with that, I appreciate the opportunity to provide testimony today to the committee, and I thank you for your public service. Please feel free to contact me at any time with questions or concerns. And as always, Representative Golden, you're always welcome for a plant tour, as well as any other members. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we'll hear from Mr. Dane.
Chairman Golden, Ranking Member Hagedorn, and esteemed committee members of the Subcommittee on Underserved, Agricultural and Rural Business Development. I appear before you today on behalf of the American Loggers Council, a nonprofit timber industry trade association representing 30 states, to address the role that forest industry performs in supporting sustainable forestry and the contribution that healthy managed forests provide in addressing climate issues. Put simply, loggers ensure healthy forests. As a Minnesota DNR commissioner told a prior governor, the Minnesota DNR doesn't manage the forests. The loggers do it for us. Public and private land managers cannot accomplish their healthy forest objectives without loggers. Healthy forests depend upon a healthy, stable, sustainable timber industry. You can have both, but you cannot have one, healthy forest, without the other, loggers. The logging industry represents jobs in rural America. Although the timber resource continues to increase, logging capacity continues to decrease. This is the result of minimal profit margins, high capital investment requirements, forest product mill closures due to shifting markets, including the COVID pandemic, for traditional forest products such as paper, and workforce development challenges. For the most part, loggers have not seen much, if any, increase in the delivered price for wood sold to mills in the last 10 years. While during the same period, equipment costs have increased 30%, insurance premiums have increased 20%, and recently, fuel prices have increased 50%. When lumber prices skyrocketed this year, most loggers did not see any benefit, and in some cases, actually experienced price cuts. From a workforce development perspective, the timber industry workforce is aging, with the median age being well over 50 years old. The workforce is predicted to continue to decline by 14% over the next 8 years. Logging is difficult and dangerous work, but those risks are not reflected in the wages and benefits paid. Logging is not competitive with other comparable industries, and younger workers are not entering the logging industry at the rate that older workers are leaving. One of the greatest challenges is transportation. There's not enough trucking capacity to meet the demand. Additionally, insurance rates in some regions are $10,000 to $15,000 per truck per year. Trucking is the weak link in the timber industry supply chain. The American Loggers Council has submitted a briefing paper as part of our full testimony that addresses these challenges and proposes legislative and policy changes that would provide assistance in resolving some of these issues. However, this is about more than rural agricultural jobs. Healthy forests are vital to addressing climate change and particularly carbon sequestration. Nothing absorbs and stores more carbon than forests. That is why the global Trillion Tree Initiative was joined by the United States in recognition of the carbon sequestration role that trees provide. We need young, healthy, diverse, and growing forests, not overmature, dead, diseased, and dying trees, and certainly not burning forests. Older forests absorb and sequester 2/3 less carbon than younger forests. If we don't agree upon that, then the timber industry will have limited opportunity to contribute to sustainable forestry as part of carbon sequestration and climate solutions. Poor forest management does not create healthy forests, but instead negates the potentially positive benefits that would otherwise be achieved from sustainable forestry practices. This is evident in the increase in wildfires in the U.S. and around the world. Global wildfire carbon dioxide emissions are at record highs. The Copernicus Atmosphere Monitoring Service of the EU found that burning forests released 1.3 gigatons of carbon dioxide last month alone. The highest since the organization began measurements in 2003, the U.S. was a leading contributor. Scientists are concerned that areas with dense vegetation, including many of our national forests, are becoming a source rather than a sink of greenhouse gases. A recent study that the U.S. Forest Service participated in acknowledged that a warming climate has extended the wildfire for obvious reasons. However, the study found that climate change accounts for just 14% of the influence on more destructive wildfires, while noting that live fuel was the largest factor, accounting for 53%. Last May, I had the opportunity to fly over and survey the aftermath of the wildfires in California. A video of the helicopter survey was produced and is included in my full testimony for the congressional record. If that video does not initiate an honest, science-based dialogue to develop a new national policy on forest management, wildfire mitigation, timber salvage, and restoration, nothing will. Sustainable forestry, practiced and performed by the American timber and forest products industry, is part of the solution in meeting the objectives of climate initiatives. However, it's entirely dependent on the rural jobs that the timber and forest products industries provide. The timber industry, healthy forests, and rural jobs are the climate solution. Thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you all very much for your opening statements here. We're going to get to the Q&A portion now, and I'll go ahead and kick things off with my 5 minutes. I think both Mr. Dane and Duran talked a little bit about some of the pandemic-driven related struggles of the logging industry over the last year. And as you both know, no doubt the Maine delegation in particular, although we've certainly had allies here in Congress, worked to get additional support for loggers and logging truck drivers that have been struggling through the COVID-19 pandemic. Could you talk a little bit about how the COVID-19 pandemic impacted the timber industry and why relief was needed for these small businesses at the same time that consumers were seeing higher lumber prices? And in addition, can you talk about the success to date of the program? I know they haven't closed out the applications, but what do you expect in regards to the overall success of the program, and what are you concerned about as you look forward over the next year? And I think we can start with Mr. Duran. And Mr. Dane, if we have some time, you can comment.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you, Chairman Golden and Jared. And I do have photos of you. If you'd like me to screen share, I'd be happy to put them up so there's actual proof of your work in the woods. I would look for your discretion on that. So in terms of your question, starting with the pandemic and the impact. So in 2020, we saw basically the pandemic start before it even came to the United States. As a result of the pandemic and its impact upon China and the Far East, we started to see markets start to close or be reduced as far back as January of 2020. And it just dissipated from there. All told to contractors in the state, between pulp and paper impacts, saw log products, obviously disruption of demand of paper products, whether it's in office buildings or restaurants, et cetera. In 2020, our members saw a drop of between 30 and 50%. And that is just compounded over the last 18 months. You alluded to what's happened with saw log markets. All of you read the headlines of sky-high lumber prices. I can tell you firsthand that here in the state, it wasn't a supply and demand issue. The log yards were full, and so there was a very high supply from the contractors that provide those solid log products to manufacturers. And then obviously demand was sky high. So it was not a simple supply and demand issue. Money literally just did not trickle down to the supply chain. So we've been hit by a double whammy, so to speak. We're very, very thankful for the work of our main delegation, especially Jared Golden and Senator Susan Collins and the rest of our delegation for providing the pandemic assistance for timber harvesters and haulers that was included in the omnibus appropriations bill that passed Congress back in December of 2020 and finally hit the street by USDA in late July of this year. Maine has taken the lead with respect to applications in that program. We're nearing nearly 300 applications. So we're pleased to see that folks are taking advantage of it. We don't know yet, how much they've applied for and how much of the 200 million is actually going to get to them. I will say this, the agricultural community and fishing community has seen nearly $30 billion of aid. The logging community, which has never had a handout or a hand up, so to speak, by the federal government, is only going to get about 200 million nationwide. It's a pittance. Again, we're not looking for the federal government to bail out every contractor. It's certainly going to help. But you can tell by the impacts that I'm giving you that it's not going to do a tremendous amount, but it's going to help those in need to get to the other side of this. So I'll allow Mr. Dane to reflect nationally, but those are the impacts here in the state.
Thank you, Chairman. Real quick, from my estimations at this point, the funding eligibility across the nation will exceed the 200 million appropriation, which is a testimony to the need for the funding that was out there and everything else. How did the pandemic impact the industry directly? Interestingly enough, Congressman Stauber's district had a mill announce a closure about 15 months ago, directly related to the impacts of the drop in demand for paper products in the offices, the schools, and that type of thing, and permanently closed that mill, as well as another mill in Wisconsin that permanently closed, that accounted for 20% of the timber consumption in Wisconsin alone. So it had direct and indirect impacts. The assistance has proven helpful.
Well, I'm out of time, but I'm going to just take a little bit of privilege. Any estimate at all on what the actual eligibility demand would look like if every logging contractor that needed help ended up getting some?
Chairman Golden, yes, the U.S. Forest Service conducted a study of the financial impacts as a result of the pandemic and estimated just slightly over $1 billion. The American Loggers Council did a survey with the consultant that estimated a $1.8 billion negative impact directly resulting from the pandemic. So, yeah, those are a couple of estimates of the entire fiscal or financial impact.
Thank you. I'll certainly have another round of questions later. Mr. Hagedorn, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dane, we'll kind of stay with you. So listening to your testimony, it's clear that, as Congressman Stauber brought up, this forest management is very important. If we don't manage the forest properly, we're in big trouble and on a number of fronts. And it seems interesting to me that a lot of times you get into states like California where they have a lot of fires, and it doesn't seem to be that the forests are managed properly, and a lot of that is extreme environmentalists getting involved, either at the political level or at the grassroots level, and preventing people from going in there and basically cultivating the forest. You know, I represent a farm area. I grew up on a farm, and you know, forest products is just another crop. That's why we have it over at the agriculture department and everything else. So, if it's kind of interesting that they don't let you go in and do what you need to do in order to protect the forest, and then when they burn down, they say, look at it's all climate change. But then, according to your statistics, no, it's not. It's about 8 to 1 or 7 to 1. Not doing proper management. So, getting into it though, you have lots of things going on that are cutting into your bottom line, driving up your costs. Obviously, inflation, things of that nature, and just bad government policies. I think there's some bad government policies on the horizon that might hurt your small businesses. We're looking at the majority party raising taxes again and maybe making it more difficult for businesses to expense their items in current years and things of that nature. The tax reform bill that was passed under President Trump, I think, helped most of your members. Would you not agree with that?
Mr. Hagedorn, absolutely, I would agree with that. As Congressman Stauber mentioned, the margins are typically 1 to 3%. Any increase in taxes on this capital-intensive industry would cut into that. It's marginal as it is, and the industry cannot afford to absorb additional increases in expenses.
So you don't know of any members that are asking for their taxes to be increased at this point, right?
No,
Okay,
sir.
Second is, I mean, just look at these big government items. You know, regulations at the federal level can affect you. Energy costs, you brought that up, and you know what's going on in the climate change arena is those things are going to drive up the cost of energy, make our energy less reliable. That can't help your bottom line. And then you get into some of these EPA requirements on your heavy equipment and trucks. And I think it was brought out by testimony of one of the others where you go from Tier 3 to Tier 4, and the difference might be this much, just this much more in trying to clean up the environment, but the cost is enormous to industries and driving up consumer costs. Can you address that a little bit?
Well, my counterpart, Mr. Duran, did reference that, and he's correct. The cost of going to Tier 4 has had a lot of unintended consequences, negative consequences. First and foremost, by adding tens of thousands of dollars to the price of a truck alone or equipment. So that's a problem. Dealing with the servicing on those systems that Tier 4 requires brings out service technicians out that are driving more out to the equipment. So I think when you take in all the indirect impacts, it would be marginal at best that there would be any environmental improvements associated with the Tier 4 equipment.
And then when you brought up a point about how important the trucking industry is to your industry, or combined in many ways, and now you have a shortage of drivers, not enough trucks on the road at a time. My understanding is at any one time in the United States, each day there might be 1,000 big trucks on the side of the road because of these Tier 4 requirements, and they just shut down, and you have to get technicians out. There are no technicians. You know, a lot of these places are offering up $10,000 bonuses for technicians to start. One of the pieces of legislation that I have is the American Workforce Empowerment Act. It says that if families have saved for college education for their kids, that they should be able to use that money, not just for four-year college, but for technical schools, certificate programs, the training for these types of things, people who are going to do the diagnostics on the truck, and then the purchase of tools and equipment. Do you think that would be the type of legislation, anything to get more people into trades and more people into the dirty jobs, as I think Mike Rowe refers to them.
Mr. Hagedorn, absolutely. That's one of our biggest challenges. We're having a conference in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho next week. One of the seminars is on workforce development. And my counterpart in Maine will be speaking on that, Mr. Duran. They developed a great program in Maine to enter the pipeline for workers in the timber industry.
But maybe if we do have a second round, maybe we can talk with him a little bit more about that.
He knows more than I do.
Thank you. I yield back.
Next up, we'll recognize Rep. Troy Carter from Louisiana 2.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. My question's for Dr. Daigneault. I'm interested to hear more about the climate solutions that forest provides. Forests provide important ecosystem services such as sequestering carbon. Forest products, by their very nature, are comprised of carbon and durable wood products, storing carbon for years. As you know, the sustainability is an issue that's very important to me. Would love to hear your thoughts on what can be done and what else is happening in the area of bolstering climate solutions through our forestry.
Yes, thank you, Representative Carter. So some sort of big solutions that are often referred to when you think about utilizing forests are sort of three-tiered. So one is keeping forests as forests. So effort that we can put into conserve forests, but not necessarily in a pure preservation perspective, but to ensure that it's not converted to alternative uses such as, strip malls and things like that. Another one is to basically improve the forest management on forests that are already out there. So what can we do? And a lot of the things that we've discussed today is what can we do to incentivize landowners to get into the woods more, better treat the land that they have, and implement different practices to get what we call ideal stocking levels, so that trees basically have space and resources to grow. And the third one is to basically take sort of marginal land that might be not best utilized and figure out how to reforest that area to essentially expand the footprint that we can. All three of those are proven to be very cost effective. If you sort of compare the level of sort of incentive that you might have to provide to a landowner relative to electrifying our transportation system or putting in solar panels or something like that. The key too also is that the healthier that we can get our forests by going in and managing and sort of freeing up space and allowing trees to grow faster, taller, wider, is that that'll allow us also to basically utilize a higher proportion of the wood into what you noted as sort of durable wood products. Right. And so the longer the more that, so the faster we can grow trees to grow larger, taller, straighter, healthier, the more that we can basically convert that into 2x4s, furniture, other things that could be basically storing that carbon for decades, even when it's removed from the stump, thereby also allowing sort of the opportunity for the next generation of forest to sort of grow in its place and continue to sequester more carbon.
Wait, let me just do a follow-up, Doc. My time's going to run out, but I just want to ask one follow-up question to that. How do working forests differ from forests under conservation? And do they play different roles in terms of sustainability and climate solutions?
Right.
So a distinction between the two and the roles they play.
Sure. So in a place like Maine, about 20% of forests are actually under some sort of condition of what we would consider conservation. But in Maine, 85% of that forest that's under conservation is actually also designated as what we would call working forests. So they might be owned by conservation groups, or they might be actually, owned by family forest companies that basically want to have their land conserved in the sense that they don't want to be converted to alternative uses, but they still want to manage that land for timber products, wildlife habitat, clean air, clean water. And so they might take a slightly different perspective than, say, a pure commercial landowner to some degree, but they're still managing for multiple uses, of which timber is a strong part of it. So we really have to be careful when we say conservation and not align that purely with preservation, or not basically doing any sort of management or harvesting from that land. A lot of conserved forest is still what we consider working forest.
And is there a competition between the two? Is there a conflict inherent?
Not necessarily. There might be that the landowners that have their land under conservation might have different objectives than what you might want to think of as a sort of pure commercial landowner or forestry company. But everyone tends to acknowledge that harvesting is part of the solution, right? But it's just part of one of many sort of suite of services that we can get from how we manage our land. The key is that we have to think about this from a very much a landscape perspective, and sort of commercial landowners, small family landowners, conservation landowners, they all can sort of work together to help meet society's needs at large.
Okay, I see my time is up. I yield. Thank you very much.
We'll now recognize Representative Roger Williams from Texas 25.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the witnesses for coming here today, and my first question is for Mr. Dane. As you know, forestry-related small businesses are crucial to providing jobs and revenue to our communities, and we've talked a lot about that today. When I talk to loggers and lumbermen back in Texas, I constantly hear concerns surrounding the labor shortage. Recently, I met with a second-generation family-owned small business in your industry from my district who told me that they are struggling to keep up with current demand because of many of their workers have decided not to return to work, and the next generations are joining in the forestry, and they're not doing that. So the federal government should be encouraging individuals to get back to the workforce rather than incentivizing them not to work and stay at home. So, Mr. Dane, can you speak more on how the labor shortage is affecting the small businesses that your organization represents? And secondly, is there a specific policy that made the labor shortage worse in the last year and a half?
Mr. Williams, thank you very much for the question. And I was just down in Texas a couple of months ago visiting with your timber industry down there. It's a great organization.
It's a great state, too, isn't it?
Absolutely, sir. I've got a survey here that the American Loggers Council did in 2019, actually before the pandemic, which references that 97% of those surveyed said it's virtually impossible to replace or add new hires to their operations. That's an ongoing problem that we have. Now, with the added, I'll be honest with you, with the added unemployment benefits, I was talking to a logger in International Falls, Minnesota, that said he's going to have to give his guys a raise to offset the additional unemployment that they're receiving to entice them to come back to work. So it is a problem.
Competition and access to capital play a fundamental role in our economy, and the government must not impede entrepreneurship and innovation, but rather ensure that American small businesses can succeed and grow without unnecessary government interference. And you just touched on that. Paying people not to work is too much of an interference. Burdensome regulations have real impacts on small business owners and the communities who depend on them. I am a small business owner, have been for over 50 years, and I know how excessive regulations can hinder growth and competition. I'm in the car business, we work on the same margins you do, so any movement one way or the other is tough on the industry. And we do not need a top-down, one-size-fits-all approach, but rather a properly regulated economy that creates opportunity for everybody. So again, is the logging industry properly regulated, do you think? And do you have concerns that the new focus on the green policy regulations will be harmful to the competitiveness and profitability of your members?
From a regulatory perspective, I'm happy to say that at the local, state, county levels, the regulation is not really excessive, but when you get to the federal level, it's extremely burdensome. The NEPA requirements and the ESA requirements have been weaponized by those that want to just stall and litigate national forest management plans.
So you have all the regulations you need to deal with right now, don't you?
We do not need any further regulations, Mr. Williams.
All right, thank you. Small businesses are finally beginning to recover from COVID-19 pandemic, and the last thing they need is for Congress and President Biden to raise taxes. We've talked about that. Raising taxes in this time is crazy. And The infrastructure bills that Democrats are pushing forward and attempting to pass this week will raise the corporate tax rate and drive up inflation, making goods and services more expensive. That's the bottom line. Despite the White House claiming that this will cost nothing, which is a complete lie in my mind, the cost will inevitably be passed on to individuals or businesses, and many businesses can't pass it on to individuals, so they have to eat it and they have to let people off to pay for it. So increasing taxes will cause businesses to hire less people and invest less back in the economy. So, Mr. Dane, quickly, can you discuss how tax increases would impact the small businesses that you represent? And if taxes are increased and your margins remain the same, which probably would not be, would that mean passing the cost on to the consumer?
Well, I'd like to answer your last part of that question first. Loggers do not have the ability to pass on that cost to consumers. Loggers are paid based on what the mills determine, and as Mr. Duran referenced, dictate, will be paid. And so it's one of the only industries in the country that I'm aware of that you don't have the opportunity to tell your consumer what you're going to sell them the product for. They tell you what they're going to buy it for. So they don't have that opportunity. Second, these are small businesses and some are corporations, so that increased corporate rate would directly impact these family businesses.
Thank you. Stay the course. There's help coming.
Thank you.
I yield my time back.
Thank you. We'll now recognize Rep. Pete Stauber from Minnesota 8.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dane, for appearing here. I'm going to put you on the spot. My good friend from Texas just says Texas is a great state. Texas or Minnesota?
Minnesota in the summertime.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. You know, we talked about the loggers and our truckers at the forefront of responsible management. You know, how has the skyrocketing cost of fuels for transportation and energy affected small logging and trucking businesses? And I will just share with you, I was at a logging a site just west of Grand Rapids, you know, Rayla Timber, and they talked about the cost for fuel and energy to run the machines. How is that affected? How is it affecting the industry and the ability to move forward?
I'll give you a quick example, Congressman Stauber. You know Chef Logging in Marcel, Minnesota. I think their fuel expenses are about $1 million a year, when we 1.2, 1.3. You add 50% increase in fuel costs right there. You're talking $500,000 to one company alone. So it definitely is a burden to the industry, and one that's unfortunate has occurred in the last 8 months.
Mm-hmm. You know, also in your testimony, Scott, you discussed the Trillion Trees Initiative, which is embodied in a bill introduced by my colleague, Representative Westerman. How do the reforms in that bill, such as streamlining NEPA, make it easier for your industry to do its job and, in turn, support forest health and carbon sequestration?
Well, let's go back to the Trillion Tree Initiative, which is a global initiative to plant 1 trillion trees around the world to absorb more carbon. It makes a lot of sense. When it comes to the NEPA reforms that are necessary, that are critically necessary, that are hampering forest management at the federal level. I was at a meeting, and I think they were talking about at one time a NEPA report was about 75 pages long. Now it's 600-700 pages long. I was out there in California. We took a helicopter tour of the aftermath of the wildfires in May. We were up there for 6 hours. We toured 3 million acres of burned land, 3 million acres of burned land. And when you look down and you see what's going on in privately owned and managed land, they are salvaging the timber, they are restoring the land, they are replanting on there. If you look at the adjacent federally managed timber, nothing is happening. No salvage is going on. No reclamation is going on. And that's all because of all the NEPA requirements that just are used to hamper forest management.
Mr. Dane, if you had one request from the EPA for your industry, maybe two requests, what would they be? How can the EPA help your industry with decisions?
Congressman Stauber, thank you for asking. I think that would probably be a question that the chairman would also like to hear. And I know Dana, Duran, and myself have been working for 3 years at least with the EPA on the biofuels and the renewable fuel standard and feedstock eligibility. The EPA has misinterpreted the RFS. Their interpretation is contrary to all other public and private timber management organizations, and that is impeding the development of renewable fuels from forest-based feedstock. They need to accept those pathways that were talked about for feedstock to be eligible for RFS and RIN credits, and we've got hundreds of millions of dollars prepared to be invested in this new technology, which again goes back to renewable fuels, but forest-based. If we could overcome that, there'd be a new plant built in Minnesota, your district. There'd be a new plant built in Maine, and there's a plant being built right now in Oregon. It's a $330 million plant that would also benefit from the EPA acknowledging that their interpretation of eligible feedstock is incorrect.
Well, thank you. In light of my short amount of time, I do know that Chair Golden and Ranking Member Hagedorn and I, we've all discussed that. And it's a priority, I know, for the chair and ranking member, and I stand with them in helping with the solution. Scott Dane, thanks for your expert testimony. On behalf of all Minnesotans, and in particular Northern Minnesota, thanks for your prior work with the ACLT. Tremendous, and your knowledge is really appreciated on this committee. Thank you very much.
Thanks for highlighting that. That was a really important exchange right there. I'm going to move into a second round. I'm going to start with Professor Daigneault. There's been some talk and focus on carbon markets as a way for small family forest owners to generate additional income out of their land. Do you believe that this is currently viable for small family forest owners? Do these carbon markets help to support forest ecosystems? Can they be a part of advancing climate mitigation solutions? But just as importantly, will they help or hurt forest products economies? And is the answer dependent on how the policy is structured or not?
Right. Thank you, Representative Gold. Lots of there to unpack. Thinking just markets at large, right? Carbon markets, they are part of the solution. It might not, but it might not be part of the solution for everybody. It will provide sort of diversified income stream to ideally promote more forest management, but the policy themselves has to be structured in a way that does that. A lot of sort of existing carbon markets that focus on forest carbon tend to penalize those who are understocked, but have the potential to grow, and basically reward a lot of those that are overstocked in the sense that they have a lot of carbon on the ground compared to maybe the average forest. The other thing that it does is it tends to, it's getting involved, particularly in carbon markets, is very time consuming, resource intensive, requires third-party audits and things like that can make it really cost prohibitive for particularly the sort of small and family forest landowners. There's some organizations like American Forest Foundation, Nature Conservancy are working to develop programs that specifically target those that own, less than 1,000 acres, but they're still pretty nascent from that perspective. So again, I think there's opportunities there, but I don't think it's the full solution. I think just saying that if we create a bunch of carbon markets and create some ways that people can buy, sell, and trade offsets are going to necessarily open up the forest to all this sort of management innovation. I think it's part of the solution, but I still think there's other aspects that we need to take into account, particularly that the duration of that people have to enter into these markets, the sort of complexity of how some of these things work. Can make it more prohibitive than maybe what someone like myself teaches in theory and in an economics course.
It's an excellent point. I appreciate that, and I know someone sitting next to me said we could have a whole hearing about that subject. But I wanted to ask then, from the perspective, going from the classroom to on the street, Dana, maybe you could talk a little. I mean, I've seen that some of these programs are structured in ways that would probably be of concern to loggers and the Forest Products Council. But is there also something good here potentially if it means that more people are going to engage in forest growth, and does it give landowners another tool in the toolbox? Like, what's your feedback on this?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Jared. And I've got a picture behind me of you operating a stroke dilemma, by the way, and that's you also on the skidder. So I just wanted to make sure folks knew that was there, that you actually did it. In terms of carbon markets, I think carbon markets scare loggers quite a bit because carbon markets generally are reduction of the annual timber harvest or the annual cut. But we feel like it can be structured in a way that we make sure that we actually weed the forest, remove the low value wood, and we can still conduct the same type of forest management without an impact to the contractor. But that's something that has to be mandated up front. And it really truly is a partnership between the landowner, the carbon market, and even the logging contractor. As I mentioned in my testimony, we created a third-party certification program for logging contractors 20 years ago called the Master Logger Program. And the Master Logger Program is the third-party audit of the harvest. Professor Daigneault mentioned, the cost to the landowner. There's got to be a third-party audit. I think, we provide a pathway to try to mitigate that cost and also achieve. So you achieve the landowner point of view, you achieve the market capability, keep their land forested because they're receiving a revenue forecast, and keep the contractor as part of that with the work that they're doing on the ground. So I think there's a path forward, but you've got to make sure that you have markets for low value wood, whether that's biomass to Mr. Thibodeau's facility at Re-Energy, or it's finding other markets for low value wood. And then the contractors are part of that. And if we can develop a system like that increases forest management, produces higher level products, greater markets, I think everybody shares in the prosperity, but that's a big nut that we have to crack.
Thank you both. Do you have any follow-up questions?
I'll just ask one if that's okay. So Mr. Duran, Mr. Dane, I'll kind of throw this out at you, just so people understand a little bit better. I mean, we all experience one way or another these incredible increases in lumber costs. I mean, people had their houses go up $40,000 to build, and people put off projects and everything else. But you say your industry doesn't really benefit from that. Can you explain to folks how it works and why that didn't trickle down to you? And I'm just kind of curious. I mean, again, the farming and ag-based folks that I work with, they have to deal with meat packers, for instance, the livestock people, and they sometimes think that the meat packers are making a lot of money at the grocery stores and everything else, selling their meat, but the farmer doesn't always get to the actual livestock farmer. Maybe that's similar here. So let's just be interested in your response.
Mr. Hagedorn, real quick, in my opinion, it was, for lack of a better word, gouging that was occurring within the markets because of demand. At the same time, there is an increase in forested land because of the CRP maturing and that type of thing. So the supply was abundant. There's an increase in logging capacity with mills shutting down and stuff. So that infrastructure was also abundant. So the mills could afford to dictate, again, the price. I talked to a logger in Grand Rapids, Minnesota the other day, and he said that the mill told him, "We're not cutting your price, we're just paying you less." So it's a mill-controlled market right there, and that's one of the reasons that the trickle-down has not occurred. But I think my counterpart, Mr. Duran, would also have good information to share.
Yeah,
Duran?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Hagedorn. I appreciate the question, and Scott is spot on. It's interesting. In the spring of this year, so let's say January to April, there were tremendous amount of reports nationally, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, on the cost of lumber and kind of the breakdown of who was making the money. And I will tell you, the logging contractors and the landowners, for that matter, were not seeing any of the benefits. We would communicate obviously with our membership, but we're also talking to the landowner community. And there were a lot of folks who would talk to a logging contractor and say, oh, you must be getting rich right now. You got to be able to pass that along. And they're just honestly saying, no, we're not getting any of this, and neither are you. And that was the bottom line. And it's interesting. We issued an opinion piece in one of our statewide newspapers back in April of this year, basically calling into question what was happening both here in the state, but also nationally as to where the money was going. And, I'm not going to point the finger at one piece of this. There are a lot of players that are involved. And, from the mills to the retailers to the wood brokers in between, I'll tell you, there are also large cooperatives who buy materials on behalf of retailers. They're involved. And so anywhere from retail to manufacturers, that's where the money was. And it wasn't just one piece of that was making the money, but I will tell you, none of it was trickling down. But after we issued that opinion piece, we saw an increase in pricing that was paid to the contractors and to the landowners. So it's funny what happens sometimes when you get punched in the eye. There is a noticeable change that took place. Obviously, this summer, the commodity markets have changed. Lumber prices have come down in many respects. There's been a change in pricing, but a lot of the public attention has, I think, influenced where money has trickled and what has happened to overall pricing. But Mr. Dane is absolutely correct. There was gouging at a high level between those areas that I identified for you.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. It just seems like you're in a little bit of a precarious spot. You can't control your destiny in many ways. But the one thing that can always help you is to make sure that we have downward pressure on the cost of production, to make sure that you can meet your bottom line, that whatever money you're going to get from the mills, you can try to keep the cost of production low. And I just come back to it. It's these big things that sometimes government can really screw up and hurt you on: taxes, regulations, energy, trade, and equipment. In this case, with the way the EPA jacked up the prices and made the equipment less reliable. In all those instances, government has an opportunity to improve your bottom line, or government has an opportunity to move you towards being out of business. And I want you to know I'm on the side of trying to help you build your bottom line. So we're going to stand for those policies. Thanks for your testimony.
Speaking of regulations, I think Mr. Stauber has a question.
Thank you, Chair Golden. I just have one additional question for Mr. Dane. There's a lot of talk about adding endangered species to the list of endangered wildlife, et cetera. What does that do? How does that affect your industry? I know in Congressman Golden's area, the lobsters are having they're having major issues, and I know in some parts of even Minnesota. What is the economic impact even prior to something being listed? What is the economic impact, and how does your industry look at that?
Congressman Stauber, thank you very much. I think it's ironic that we think about this issue from a Minnesota perspective. And it's just one more tool that's going to be part of the arsenal to allow those who want to litigate forest management to death to utilize. And here's an example of it. The Canadian lynx is kind of goes back and forth. Is it going to be endangered? Is it not going to be endangered or threatened or whatever else it is? So they track Canadian lynx. First of all, they should stay in Canada and not come into Minnesota and mess up our timberlands. No, just kidding there. But they tracked them, and you know what they found out? The Canadian lynx traveled on logging roads. They're not stupid. They're not going to go through the brush and everything else. They're going to travel on logging roads. So logging roads are not counterproductive to the Canadian lynx habitat at all. But again, once you get something on that list, you can use it as a tool to interfere with forest management.
Yeah, and that's what we've heard. I've heard back home as well, and I think it's nationwide. And I think we have to really take a healthy look at that and what we need to do to really I guess, stop the weaponization of the courts and allow your industry to do what you do well, manage forests, bring great jobs. You know as well as I do, in Minnesota, it's like a $10 billion industry statewide. It's huge, so we stand ready to help, as Congressman Hagedorn stated, not only in Minnesota and Maine, but across this great nation. So with that, I'll yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Good question. The lobster industry has taken a big hit, and weaponization of the courts is, I think, the perfect way to put it. That's a whole nother topic right there, but one we're in the thick of in Maine. I wanted to ask Mr. Thibodeau, I'm sure you're aware that there's a perception out there that burning wood for energy isn't the best use of forests and trees, well, particularly when it comes to carbon sequestration and climate solutions. I wanted to give you the opportunity to talk about how re-energy uses fuel and where it comes from, and how using that wood for energy generation helps ensure the continued health of forest land.
Thank you, Mr. Golden. Forest and mill residue that we use for generating renewable electricity at our facilities come from logging operations and mills near our power plants. The vast majority of that comes from within about a 75-mile radius. When forested lands are maintained and harvested in a sustainable way, the forest continues to grow, and it grows healthier and continues to consume atmospheric carbon. So wood markets and wood utilization are essential to forest maintenance. Without an outlet for owners to sell their harvested wood, the owners are more likely to sell their land for other uses. You've got to think of the biomass energy industry as taking the leftovers or the mill residues from forest operations. The low value, low grade products are critical, as many of our other witnesses have testified today, to promoting forest health. For example, creation of jobs from biomass industry, as well as economic output of our facilities. We recently had a economist study our two facilities in Maine, and they supported more than 360 jobs and had an economic output of $95 million per year on an annual basis. The Stratton facility alone, where I'm located, purchased fuel from more than 58 Maine-based logging and trucking companies and more than 19 different mills in the state of Maine. So that's supporting that low value market. So there is a perception out there that burning wood is not the best use of forests and trees. And I would agree with that when you think about the higher value markets for lumber mills, furniture makers, paper. I would agree with that. However, you have to make sure there's a clear line there that we are not cutting down forests to make power. We are taking the leftovers, the residuals that are left behind, and from mill residues. In order to make a 2x4, you have to debark that tree. That bark will come to a biomass energy facility such as ours for power production. Again, stressing base-loaded renewable power. Biomass is one of the only, along with geothermal, that is considered base-loaded renewable power, which means we're producing power 24/7, no matter how hot or cold it is, if it rains, if it's windy or not, or if the sun's shining. So thank you, Chairman Golden. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, of course. I'm assuming, by the way, you don't have to go too far into it if you agree that you're in agreement with Mr. Dane about the importance of the RFS for biomass.
Yeah, absolutely. I would echo Mr. Dane's sentiments exactly. The RFS is something that we've been working with very closely through the Biomass Power Association and trying to activate those biomass pathways. Kind of how I mentioned in my testimony, it is really critical from a federal policy issue for the biomass industry and to address the interpretation of the term biomass as well. Infrastructure that supports, such things as use of electric vehicles is very important to climate change. And and to encourage the development and continued operation of renewable energy projects such as ours. That renewable fuel standard is really critical. It will strengthen our potential role in the renewable fuel standard. So as we hope and expect, the biomass to electricity pathway will become operational.
I know in Maine, we're really looking at policies that could turn our state into a bit of an energy island, where we really can be producing, and self-sufficient on our own energy production, and biomass is certainly a part of that. And we see it also helping small-scale manufacturers when they're able to, generate on-site, which has occurred in a few places, but there's some tweaks that need to be made, I think, to increase that. Dana and I always agree we shouldn't build a public school in Maine that doesn't have also some kind of biomass boiler or something built into it. It's public expenditures, but all of that, it depends also upon the future of having this forest resource and making sure that it stays healthy. So I guess my last question is just to the professor. What types of policies are you looking at either private or public, looking into the future to make sure that we have a healthy forest? I mean, do you think we're going to need to introduce new forest species, or is it sustainable the way it is? I mean, what's your recommendation for the forest products industry in Maine?
Yeah, so great question, Congressman. So one thing to think about is that I think we have to acknowledge that climate change is inevitable, right? We're already experiencing that as Mr. Duran said, how we have to harvest and what species we're seeing, it's changing, right? And so we have to do more to basically get that information out and help those on the ground who are managing logging, et cetera, handle that and adapt accordingly. In addition, with that, we do need to acknowledge that some species are going to grow faster than others. But at the same time, those aren't necessarily the basically most desired species per se. Coupled with that, as we know, we talked a little bit about carbon markets, but I think again, we need to come up with ways to basically get people in the woods and managing from a whole suite of different opportunities. So that's more incentives to do management, more through the USDA's NRCS and other things that at least are facilitating more management, more removal. That goes couples with what Mr. Thibodeau was saying, where we do need to basically have sort of robust markets for biomass, which is going to help basically get some of that lower grade wood out there, which is then going to increase and enhance the resiliency and health of our forests of what remains. In addition, I've noted that what everyone's talked about today is that we need to continue to find ways that make it, again, profitable to want to do things in the woods, right, and actively manage. And so I've noted at least that some of the sort of federal tax incentives that have been out there, at one point a couple of years ago, they were considering dropping them. I think keeping those were a huge boost, or a very important aspect for not just the sort of logging and forestry community, but for climate change at large. And lastly, I think we also need to acknowledge that the economy is changing, people's needs are changing, and their uses of wood products are changing. So by continuing to explore other ways that we can use wood as substitutes for fossil-based products, things that are more durable and sort of meet the needs, the consumption needs, that's going to help put more value on the forest and in the woods that we rely on, which is then going to help boost a lot of these communities that have a long heritage and history of relying on our forest resources to make those communities thrive. We need to continue to push in that way and probably acknowledge that maybe pulp and paper is not going to be the solution for the next 100 years, but we still have an abundant wood basket that can provide a lot of resources that we can take advantage of.
Thank you. I think that's as good a place as any to wrap things up right there. I want to thank all the witnesses on the panel for joining us today, and want to thank all my colleagues for joining us and for their good questions. From the testimony and the exchange of thought here, I think it's clear the great benefits of the forest products industry and sustainable forestry can have for the country. And we all have a role to play in contributing to a healthy forest, to mitigating climate change, and to taking care of our local economies, making sure they can be successful. So I believe it's our responsibility to support industries like those that we have in our forested states and communities. Protecting our environment doesn't have to be bad for business, and I think our witness has proved today that is certainly not the case in places like Maine and in Minnesota and a lot of others, I know down south as well. Sustainable forestry provides positive economic and social outcomes and meets the needs of the present, and we hope future generations as well. So I look forward to working with my colleagues to advance policies to keep our forests healthy and continue to help small business owners in the forest products industry. So I'd ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit statements and supporting materials for the record. And without objection, so ordered. And if there's no further business before the committee, we're adjourned. Thank you all very much.